All right. We got the red light. That's good. Let me check my numbers here real quick, folks. And I believe this is number 47. 47. And if I go back and take a look at the properties here of the first thumbnail for my first video, it says that I made it. It was created on March 20th. So today is June 1st, April 20th, May 20th. Yeah, so in about 70 days, I guess, I've made 46 of these things. Wow. Really, I just don't even know where I found the time. I mean it. Time is going by so quick. And it's already after 3 p.m. You know? Time is going by so quick. I find myself still having coffee in my cup after lunchtime. And I'll look over at the bird feeder, which I can see from here whether it needs more. We've got all kinds of birds here. Doves, cardinals, blue jays, wrens, finches, catbirds, woodpeckers, hummingbirds, robins. They all come here to eat. I put out 2 suet seed cakes today and bought a new cage to put the second one in because everybody's hungry. But it's funny because 2 guys just showed up while I was talking about it. Oops. They're like, oops, he saw us. Run away. When I was talking about Genesis and Enoch, it was a new thing for me, a new takeaway. You know, using the testaments, the testimonies of the patriarchs that have been made available to us. They're biographies, essentially. Except that when God speaks, he makes sure that at least what he had to say was accurate on various subjects. And in there, I was given some lovely scripture that said that all of creation obeys God, right? From bugs to galaxies, everything is working in harmony with everything else as much as it's able to, right? And it's the sentient creatures. You know, we hear about, all those cattle, you know, the cattle industry, cows, milk. Their poop is causing all this methane. That's a big problem. It's like, no, it isn't. That isn't the problem. It may be inconvenient to some people that some creatures just simply are born, live, and then stop living. You know, they fulfill the destiny of that individual creature's life, and plants are alive. Okay? That's why we have grain offerings, right? Drink offerings, because these were living things that were terminated, you know, for man's use. The whole vegan is more moral than omnivorous diet argument is malarkey. Okay? It's probably pretty insulting to plants. But people and the sons of God, angels, the watchers, they're all watching whether they're good or evil, because that's what they're supposed to do. They helped make stuff in the first place. You know, authority to do certain things was delegated down in perfect detail, right? From the owner's manual author himself. And all of these systems were set in motion. This giant electrical field of particles with different densities and frequencies operating together in a wonderful, magically, just, it's eye candy, all of it. I think of my property as just a lovely green, fauna-filled place to do the things I do. It's perfect. And there's things that we can do. You know, Adam's gig was name the animals and tend this school of flora and fauna in the way that I've told you to. And the nation of Israel was already in the novel, many chapters down the line. And when you create something that can opt not to do things in concert with the score, and you introduce dissonance into a composition, things can get pretty funky, as they did. I've read reviews of musicians' performances where they describe the musician's solo as having molested the song, right? So people and watchers, angels, in all of their variety, can choose. I'm choosing to just riff right now. Okay, I'm just riffing. God told me, as I'm sure he told a lot of people in the Old Testament, when it comes to things that I put on your heart and in your head, it might be because you're supposed to go someplace with that and proclaim it. And in modern parlance, in many instances, when we are in alignment with, you know, the will of the Father, sometimes he just kind of leans in and in a no more complicated way than to just kind of remind you that in situations like this, better out than in. And I think a lot of content creators kind of operate according to that template, right? Behavioral template, that template that makes having self-control easier because you don't have to come up with the method, right? It's provided for you. You know, these are the good things, these are the bad things. These are the things God hates, and these are the things that God will manifest through you, the fruit, if you're doing the things he doesn't hate. And you'll never get in trouble doing that stuff, because there's no law against kindness, forgiveness. patience when you're unhappy or hoping for something, you know, for someone to have a medical improvement. It doesn't always happen super fast. God's really clear about no. Sometimes we mistake wait for no because we're impatient. And sometimes we pre-script the whole affair so that if certain things occur, we'll take that as a yes. But we've created the things we're looking for. And I listen for the no. And if I don't get a good solid no, I wait to see if yes comes. That's how I roll. Every time I think about doing things that might improve the reach of these messages, utilizing the pain rhythm and ways to game it, I don't want to play games. It's a waste of time and thought. And plus, it's placing hope in bad places that are treading very close to pride, if not holding hands with it. You know, and as somebody that's been performing original music in front of people, I've been in plenty of cover band situations. At this point, that's almost like a confession for me, because I've begun to realize that music. I want to thank Philip Anthony Mitchell down in Georgia for one particular message that he blew up the ridiculous permissions people give themselves to do things that are very clearly forbidden. He blew it up, okay? He blew up the whole notion of celebrities self-identifying, professing Christianity in their media and maybe in their interviews sometimes. I call this Jesus seasoning, okay? But all the Jesus seasoning in the world isn't going to make a cat's litter box into a lunch, okay? If your foundation is excrement, meaning you, if it's dirt, if it's just dust, it's you, that's celebrity. And now we get into all this crazy false worship stuff. Ooh, I feel like a Christian when I listen to people who say they're Christians and make music. It's really stupid. But cover bands, I think of the professing Christian who's never been called or refused to repent when called, but keeps doing the Sunday morning entertainment. You know, the Business Expo in the pews thing, MTV with a cross. It's fun to dress up once in a while, okay? Or just go in there to see who wants to come to the man cave to watch the game this afternoon, right? Those folks are tares. They're chaff. They've rusted. And those kind of behaviors cause the world a lot of trouble. And yet that's the way most church-goers are. And the Bible said that's the way it's going to be when we get near the end. The churches are just going to be full of nonsense and fiction and vanity and loudness, smoke and mirrors. Everything's going Hillsong, to quote a megachurch production director who was just simply chasing Christian celebrity based on existing models. Okay? It's like when a good movie becomes a TV series. I defy anybody to point out a TV series based on a movie that was any good, right? Sequels generally suck. Unless it's a continuation of a large text that takes a few movies to make happen, like, say, your Lord of the Rings or something like that. Most people, their religious behavior is sort of the equivalent of playing an instrument in a cover band, a successful cover band, a cover band that gets steady work, going out and marketing yourself to the itchiest ears and delivering what the itchy ears want. They want the songs they like. They want familiarity. They want their musical comfort zone. They want something that allows them to talk about themselves with whomever they're in this venue listening to this familiar music, because now they can talk about themselves. Oh, well, I remember when this song came out, and then they'll talk about something about themselves that is vain or stupid. Maybe they'll tell you about, the year that song came out was the year that and it's something that you really ought not be talking about. Okay, but when you're not sober-minded, these things occur. Yeah, I did cover band church for years, right? Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. I'm so glad you could attend. Step inside, step inside. Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. A week ago, my son had a affirmation of vows. He's been married a couple of months, but wasn't able to make an event happen that everybody he wanted to be there could get to until last weekend. And at Lake Reidsville, in Reidsville, North Carolina, sister city right down the road, that was a tobacco town. This was a textile town with rivers, right? Works for both industries. And it was lovely, in an outdoor, open but roofed picnic area. I would say that it was probably 30 by 40 feet with nice tables in there, and down at one end was a nice grill with a chimney and stuff. And it was a lovely, lovely ceremony. And I had a hard time finding that particular number 6 pavilion, because 1 through 5 were all the way down in the park on the lake mostly. But number 6, as soon as you come through the gate, you take a hard left down a gravel road that doesn't look like regular cars ought to be driving on it. And it takes you all through this nice forest, nice dense forest, and pretty bumpy ride. And then at the very end of it is pavilion number 6. And I had to stop at the park office to ask them, where's pavilion 6, because I couldn't find it. And they handed me this card, and I looked at it, and I said, okay, I understand, and I was able to get there. And so I kept the card, and when I got home, I looked at it in detail and realized that it is an aerial view of sort of a golf course, but I think it's like a frisbee golf course, because there are these baskets with numbers on them sticking up out of the ground at various places. I saw a few of them as I was going back on that trail to get to the 6th pavilion. And that got me thinking about golf again. I've got videos that talk about the god of golf, Tubal Cain, 2 balls and a cane, right? Oops, that one went in the lake. Glad I got a second ball. And, you know, Tubal Cain was a metal worker, a craftsman god, you know, one of these Nephilim. And a child of Cain, right? A child of Cain, the first person to kill a person. And, you know, the first and 50-50 mix of the serpent and human DNA. And everything after that is more. Do you live in a residential part of town too? Oh man, where the heck was I? Oh yeah. So Cain had, you know, 4 kids. He had a daughter named NAAMAH, who was kind of the mother of monsters, because according to my researches, she kind of was all in about trying to generationally increase the content of the serpent seed, and may have, you know, Gen 6 says that these sons of God looked at these beautiful women and kidnapped whichever ones they wanted for the purpose of having children, right? Lust. I think NAAMAH raised her hand and was waving it like, no, I want to do that. And a lot of, I think, some of the more ubiquitous monsters of mythology probably came through her. Okay? I'm just saying. And the other 3 kids of Cain, one of them was sort of like invented being a wrangler and a cattle, the cattle industry, you know, the first meat farmer, as it were. And then there was another brother that was a musician and made like organs and harps. And the organ is a reed instrument and a harp is a stringed instrument. And so these types of instruments continue today. You know, the classic 4-piece rock band has percussion, timbrels, as they were called in the Old Testament, either a horn or an organ player, either a piano or a guitar or bass player, stringed instruments. Piano is a percussive string instrument, right? All right, I'm going to keep going. I get to use my graphic, haha, made your battery die again. Last time that happened was up at Moorhead Park when I was doing my first video about how some veterans feel about the way churches idolize them for about a sum total of 5 minutes a year on holidays. The battery gave out there too. But that's okay, because I was able to run in and turn off the asparagus that I've got cooking in some chicken broth on the stove. And, you know, was able to get a couple of new suet seed cakes up and take the asparagus trimmings out and throw them around the base of a little peach tree we got going over there. I take all of my vegetable trimmings and put them back outside where they can go back down into the dirt again. And anyways, so I had to go in and look at the first video to see where did I leave off, because I had no idea when the light turned off and I wasn't being recorded anymore. But fortunately, it was in a pretty clean break there where I had begun to talk about the descendants of Cain. Okay, Cain had a couple of kids. Enoch, he got a city built, and then, you know, Enoch had a kid, Methuselah or something. There were a couple of M kids, and then this guy named LAMECH comes along. And LAMECH is a jerk. I mentioned him in another video, and he's got 4 children. He got 2 wives. And he was kind of the first guy. I suppose the reason why he's mentioned is because he came up with polygamy, as though one spouse isn't enough. All right? You know, this guy's all in on breaking that commandment about, you know, a man's going to cleave to one woman and one woman will cleave to her husband, and this is the way it ought to be. All right? And he's got 2 wives. His first 3 kids are those boys that I mentioned. And I said a little bit about NAAMAH, but I want to keep going on this NAAMAH thing, okay? I'm just kind of riffing today. I don't have much in the way of notes. Here, let me bring this in closer. How's that? And on the back side, this was in my Genesis 6, Enoch 6 video. These were the notes from that. And in many ways, I'm just kind of continuing on that thread without scripture in front of me. All right? And NAAMAH. You remember that Rick James song, Super Freak? I think that's NAAMAH. All right? Not the kind of girl you want to bring home to mother. All right? And she is certainly kind of almost like an elemental precursor of the Jezebel spirit, to my thinking. And this is where I understand that a lot of extra biblical stuff informs me. You know, the study of a lot of different ancient cultures and what they believed and teaching that stuff, right? You know, the dots connect differently when you got more dots. And there's a man here on YouTube who's got a channel that he calls Mud Fossil University, and he's a very brilliant geologist who has obtained a terrific amount of knowledge and wisdom about anatomy, okay, also. And his name is Roger Spur. And he seems like that cool high school science teacher or middle school science teacher that you had who seemed kind of nutty because he was so all in about science. That's this guy. I love this guy. He's great. And he would suggest that many of these giants of old didn't really decompose, but rather just sort of fell where they died, and that they were very big. Okay? I mean, there are mention of giants being miles high in ancient texts. And, you know, if you ever saw the movie versions of Clash of the Titans, this is when a lot of this Gen 6 stuff was getting way out of hand, basically, and was creating a circumstance whereby some divine intervention was absolutely required. Okay? Every culture has a blooper reel of the real deal in their mythology. Okay, just loaded with bloopers and error and missing things and stuff. But I think that NAAMAH may equate to echidna in the whole Babylonian and post-Babylonian narratives. People call them myths. I call them legends. And what legends are a combination of history and belief. And the legends capture the zeitgeist of a past age in a way that's very picturesque, factual in terms of chronologies and stuff. And supernatural in ways that are a lot more overt than they are in the 21st century. Okay? And Roger suggests that a mountain range at the top of the African continent is in fact the remains. To dust you shall return. What is dust? Minerals, elements, you know, your blood. People that are anemic don't have enough iron in their blood. Well, where do you think iron comes from? It comes from the earth. How did it get there is a whole nother question that mythology could inform us a little bit about, especially when there are consistencies on different continents and stuff, right? Roger Spur thinks that perhaps this mountain range, which has, it looks like a serpent human hybrid that was miles high if it were standing. Perhaps it could fly. And there's a story in Greco-Roman mythology of the slaying of a massive giant dragon with some kind of supernatural sword. It was disemboweled, essentially, laterally, like this, and fell and died. I think it might have been Zeus who did that. Well, anyway, Spur thinks that that's the dragon. And he even very convincingly suggests that this dragon was attacking a giant fish with its venom. They talk about fire-breathing dragons. Okay, venom. Burns, acid burns. And that the fish was struck by this stuff and it dissolved the upper fin of the fish. And I mean, this fish is bigger than, it's about as big as 4 countries on the African continent combined. And the old mythologies say that that was Typhon. And he had a mate named Echidna. And that between the two of them, a whole bunch of monsters were birthed. Okay? Cerberus, Erebus, the one with 2 heads, that giant with too many arms and heads that kept these strange red cattle on an island, these man-eating horses, we know that the Minotaur came from a different source. Pegasus popped out of the neck of the just beheaded Medusa. Other kinds of interesting birth stories, like Aphrodite showing up on a seashell like it's a canoe, standing there. And what was it? Athena popped out of Zeus's head when someone hit him in the head with a hatchet. These forbidden unions produced a lot of monsters in every mythology as well as in Genesis 6, you see. And I think NAAMAH was, the first. Think about the 7 deadly sins, all right? Lucifer, pride. Azazel, envy. He didn't want to obey the owner's manual for creation. He wanted to go and get creative himself. and did. Semyaza and his crew, lust, combined with envy and pride. And Cain is the dawn of the serpent seed. And 4 generations later, they're very deliberately doing things with genetics. They're herding humanity in cities. They're creating these densities of people. And commerce begins to happen rather than just living off the bounty of the planet, which was kind of the deal. People were originally people were supposed to just kind of scatter out, stake a claim, you'll be provided for, have a lovely life. But, by the time we get down to LAMECH, we've already got polygamy. So, out of that lust and gluttony, behavioral gluttony, kinetic gluttony, are born one of the demigods, right, that propels people into wasting huge hunks of money and time and fellowship walking around. Well, actually, most of them waste even more money getting the little cart to drive around. And I looked at the local golf courses here, and Tubal Cain's worshipers are willing to spend between $21 and $40 per game to play 18 holes. It'll cost you about $5 to $15 more if you want to use a cart to transport you around, which transforms it from a sport into a drive. Okay? A drive with a lot of bathroom breaks, essentially, except that you're putting or trying to get up on the green. And then you get back in the cart and you keep driving. People that would like to member up are going to be pitching in another roughly $100 to $120 for the membership benefits. And if you get sweaty and want to swim in the pool, I suppose that the membership covers the cost of the pool. But if you're a golfer and you're not a member and you bought yourself a tee time and rented yourself a cart, and now you're all sweaty and you want to go swim, shower off and lounge around in the shallow end for a little while, that's going to cost you another $15. Both golf courses have had pools in them. I think one of them no longer does. If your kids want to swim, it'll be $15 per kid. Even if you really just want to take a dip before you go out to dinner. So that's a fair amount of money to have on hand after you've cheerfully given to the poor in your community. You've cheerfully provided for the widows and the orphans, the housing, the food, the educational and spiritual resources they need, the material things that these people need. It's remarkable to me how many people have, after having done all of the things that God would look at and say, now there's some fruit. And maybe about a particular church, they might say, that place is an orchard and the fruit is excellent. And there are some churches that are really helpful to people in need. there's a coalition of churches that pool their resources and provide an advocate for their congregations' needs, and also participation in efforts that the coalition does here. And it's all over the county, and we get some things from Greensboro and Guilford County in terms of canned goods and so forth, and dry grain and beans and things. There are some good churches that get involved in that stuff, but they are outliers, major outliers. Most churches barely take care of their own people, and really are not terrifically open to having people with too much material need continue having that need. And ministries that can help reduce people's needs by, scripturally intervening in costly addictions, beverage addictions, pharmaceutical addictions, kinetic addictions. There's not enough of that either. And I've never heard a preacher ever criticize sports, right? Ball games. Think of one game that uses a ball, from water polo to horse polo to all of the American favorite sports and Western sports. The love for what they call football in South and Central America, which we call soccer in this country. Tubal Cain sport. When I think about this, my dad was always a golfer, ever since he was a kid. And aged out, right? I'm aging out of playing guitar. I play about 2 hours a week, tops, on a Thursday night, usually. Because things get stuck. It's just how it is. You can't do it anymore. But it seems to me that ball games are wasted blessings and wasted time that doesn't accomplish God's purpose in any way that can be quantified. Okay? Well, we had a great conversation during the game. So what? I had a lot of great conversations up behind the post office during the annual food bank push that happens every year in May, where all the post office gets involved and is picking up donations as they drive their routes from people all around the community, and it is busy. And I'm telling you, we get just scores and scores and scores of donations, really cool things too, that, man, I would just love to walk into the homeless shelter that we worked at down here years ago, with some of the amazing food that people are willing and not past the shelf date neither, I might add. That's important. Some people give away stuff that was no good a year ago. Salmon, big bags of beef jerky. A lot of foods are grab and go, and they have some sort of a pop top that's easy to open for things that you can just eat, and you don't have to heat them up and have a kitchen. All kinds of, beverages that are good ways to hydrate, and, a lot of non-perishable goods that can last a while, and things that can be carried that don't weigh too much, like in a person's backpack. A lot of nice stuff. salmon, a canned ham. I saw this canned ham. I was like, oh, someone is going to have a good time with that. And so there are a lot of good places around. But I dare say that I've never met a person that is a golfer who put the needs of their community ahead of a golf game. Never have. And I've never heard anyone talk about someone who did. I've heard about a lot of churches sponsoring some kind of a fundraiser event that involves playing golf. But as a person that's been boots on the ground for nearly 30 years in this community, the fruit of anything involving golf has never reached a hungry mouth that I've met personally. Ever. It just doesn't. And I'm not going to be talking about who and pointing fingers, but there are at least a couple of churches in this town where I am quite certain that they are gaming the system and eating the food that they are alleging will go to people in need. Right? Because there's a lot of people that convince themselves that they're not breaking one of the 10 Commandments by just simply fooling with the semantics of what they say. Politicians do this all the time, where you can't say they were lying because they never said enough for that true accusation. In hindsight, you realize that you were lied to. You can't deal with it in real time because most people are too polite, right? Or they have common sense. And they remember that when you are arguing with somebody in public and you're correct and the other person is wrong, to anybody who's observing the argument, they won't be able to tell the difference, right? But I think that there are some pastors and staff that are basically taking food that's intended for people that are really in need and then saving enough money on groceries to be able to do something like this. If the shoe fits, wear it, pal. If the shoe fits, wear it. The serpent seed, Tubal Cain, Jubal, the first celebrity musician, right? The Eric Clapton or Beyonce of his day. Jubal, from which came the slaughterhouse industry and meat and the transporting of meat. People eat all kinds of things, don't they? And NAAMAH, who I think was inhabited by whatever fallen angel or angels rule over lust. And I think that's something to think about, because that was eugenics way back then, to make a more powerful race and retain the forbidden knowledge that came through Lucifer. Don't eat off of that tree. Oops. Azazel came down with what he knew about how to use this mechanism and started fooling around and swapping out parts and creating his own little zone. Oops. Lucifer, who's kind of been hanging on the fringes watching this human race come into being, and he's like, oh man, I thought I was the favorite. He's listening to God and God's first couple talking. And the whole time he's like, I can't believe that you love them more than me. How many families have a little bit of that jazz going on? And there's one for Devin. Hey, Devin. The serpent seed. Right? The serpent seed was caused by narcissism in the first place. Right? Let's drive this home, which Devin I'm talking about. Okay? Families full of narcissism. And their various strange allegiances and memberships and little g gods that they chase and worship, right? NAAMAH, whatever spirit caused later Jezebel to do her thing, from which this spirit got its most popular name, okay? Aphrodite, Ishtar, it all goes back to NAAMAH. So that's where I'm going to draw this to a close, because, yep, this is probably another one that's about an hour long. And we're getting up near the time of day when there's going to be more vehicles. And I'd like to thank my big, fat, gray cat, Big Boy, for not getting curious and coming up here and horsing with the camera like he used to do. God bless y'all.